Welcome to Parenting Adventures, the podcast that brings clarity, compassion, and real-world solutions to the everyday challenges of raising kids. Each episode, we sit down with leading experts to unpack the issues that matter most to families today, offering evidence-based insights and practical takeaways. And if academic struggles are part of your parenting journey, Tutor Teach is here to help. Visit the link in our show notes to get started today. Now let's get into the episode.
Have you ever wondered how the bonds you form with your child in the early years might shape who they become later in life? I'm your host, Lara, and today we're diving into the science of attachment with Dr. Marissa Nivison. Dr. Nivison is a Banting Postdoctoral Fellow at the University of Calgary's Determinants of Child Development Lab in the Department of Psychology. She completed her PhD in Developmental Psychology at the University of Minnesota, where her research explored how early caregiving experiences and parent-child relationships influence emotional well-being and attachment across the lifespan. In this episode, we talk about what attachment really means and why it matters for our kids' relationships as they grow. Dr. Nivison helps us unpack common myths about attachment, explore how our own childhood experiences can shape the way we parent, and find that sweet spot between being hands-off and being too controlling. We also discuss whether children who didn't have ideal early experiences can still form strong, healthy relationships later in life, and how parents can strengthen their bond with their kids at any stage. If you've ever wondered how your relationship with your child today can impact their confidence, emotions, and relationships in the future, you won't want to miss this episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what got you interested in your field of studies?
I'm excited to be here and to chat with you today. So I am a developmental psychologist. So I study how early parenting relationships really impact development across the lifespan. I'm currently what is called a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Calgary, essentially a fancy name for doing some further specialized training after I received my PhD. And I spend most of my days conducting research. I really got into this field because I was really interested in how caregiving kind of sets the scene for how we become people and how we function and how we relate to others. So I really wanted to look into more about these early caregiving experiences.
And it's such an important topic to start at the beginning of the cycle of that relationship building for young minds and stuff, and just to be able to follow and see how it affects them through life. So I think that's a really interesting focus that you're doing your studies on, or your postdoctoral studies. So what exactly is attachment, and why does it matter for our kids' relationships later in life?
Yeah, so we see that in the first year of life, the way in which parents and children interact with one another really kind of sets the stage for functioning in general. So, for example, when we have an infant who's crying, parents who better are in tune with those signals, so they notice the child's crying, they get to them, they see that, oh, maybe they need a diaper change, maybe they need to be fed. They respond to this situation in a calm and steady manner and essentially make the child feel better. And slowly these interactions, it's not a one-time thing, it's over the course of this first year, really teach the child that in times of stress their parent will be there for them, and it really facilitates this emotional bond wherein which the child can rely on and be there and be supported by their parent. And this is kind of the idea, is that when parents are sensitive and responsive, they'll be more securely attached, and this is where we see those whole host of good things like academic achievement later on, emotion regulation, less anxiety, less depression. But on the other hand, if we have a parent who isn't as responsive, they're very overwhelmed, unable to respond to the infant might then learn that they kind of need to learn to soothe themselves, and this kind of support system may not always be there. So it's this idea that caregivers are there and they'll support my engagement with my environment as I age.
It's wild to me to think that that first year, where the child will never have a functioning memory of that year, but we do obviously as their parents, is so foundational in how they almost anticipate us as their parents and then anticipate themselves. Like, it's almost like this confidence building year that parents aren't super aware of. Like, the baby's crying, he or she pooped or peed, let's change the diaper. Baby's crying, must be hungry. It's like a very, very knee-jerk kind of response, but you're forming that early attachment without realizing it almost.
It is definitely, it doesn't seem very obvious. Like you've said, you're really just focused on, getting through the day to day. Being a new parent is exhausting. And importantly, we see that although the first year of life is really important, attachment is maintained across childhood. So even if things were not ideal or not where parents want to be, there's always room for improvement. There's always room for change.
That was my next question. A child who perhaps grows up in a less stable household or with multiple caregivers, or perhaps even in the foster care system or something like that, does that have lasting impacts on that early attachment? And is it rectifiable, I suppose, as time goes on?
Definitely, we see that it can have impacts. Again, this kind of attachment relationship isn't determining your life, but rather like setting you up for how to navigate your environment. So we see when children are in less than ideal situations, they might not have this support that would help them, but kids are extremely resilient. They are able to adapt and function well regardless. And something that has always drawn me to attachment is that we don't only have attachment relationships with our parents, although that's the first one that's most predominant. As we age and we form more meaningful relationships, you can form attachment bonds with friends, with romantic partners, with your siblings. And so all of these experiences might serve as like a corrective healing experience. So even if I didn't get the support I needed in early childhood, I now am in a very supportive relationship, and my ideas of these relationships are improved by that. So there's always room for change.
It's like a moving target. You might not have had that, maybe the idealistic relationship with your parents or your grandparents, but maybe you meet a partner who gives you that feeling and their family really embraces you in your life or something like that.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, how do the bonds we form with our children in the early years impact their emotions and social skills as they grow?
So, the way I like to think about the impacts of attachment and early caregiving is when an infant is upset in infancy, realizing that there's a solution to their problem, whether that's, being fed, having a diaper change, or sometimes just needing a cuddle. We see that there are ways to process these feelings in order to make ourselves feel better. So, when you're hurt or you're scared and you know that your parent is there and is telling you everything's going to be okay, we're able to actually regulate our own emotions better. And we see that when parents are more sensitive and help us with our own emotions later on, when kids are at school, they're able to take the skills that they learned with their parent and apply that to their context. So a child who's better able to regulate their own emotions, both positive and negative, is also more likely to have better friends at school. They're more likely to engage in their academic studies because when they encounter a math problem that's frustrating, they're able to calm themselves down and be able to ask for help. So it's not that we see that parents are kind of like determining these outcomes, but it's more of this tool belt that these children have these sources that when they're encountering new situations, they might be doing better than someone who maybe had less emotion regulation with their parents.
Okay, interesting. So, question on that one is I'll use one of my kiddos for an example. At home, this child of ours is very, very emotionally sound, really, really pleasant, super easy to parent, gets along well with his siblings, just like an absolute joy at home. But when he steps into the preschool or the schooling scenario, it's like he's a different child where he almost loses himself in it and he's actually shows more frustration and he shows more defiance. So, is there a way to reconcile the two when you feel like that emotional support is working on the home front, but not in the public front, and vice versa? We had one child who publicly displayed very, very balanced, but at home came home and kind of let it all out when he was at home. And so, what's the balance there of merging those two worlds?
Yeah, so we see that, and that's a very often occurrence, that we see that kids who may be like challenging and misbehaving and getting into all sorts of ruckuses at home, when they're at school, they're perfect little angels. The teachers are like, wow, I've never had a better student. Why aren't they acting that way at home? We see that context matters. And so for some children, it's harder than others to be in a new setting. If you're thinking about home life, they're comfortable, they're with the people they love the most. They know how things work. They know how things go. Versus being in a very new environment in a preschool context, there's a bunch of new people. There's a new teacher. They're having you do more structured tasks that might engage behaviors that aren't as tapped into at home. So like really forcing yourself to sit down and focus, they might not have had. And it's pretty common not to have a very structured, rigid, sit down time at home. And so it's really just about navigating these new experiences. So if you find that your child is struggling with one specific aspect, maybe they're shy around other kids or they're having a hard time sitting down and focusing, practicing that at home, having them work on their social skills with new people, going to the playground, or even contexts where maybe you're doing some reading together or kind of setting up that framework. Just thinking about how, they're in this entirely new environment and it's something that they've not navigated before. And in the opposite direction, right? Your child is probably just comfortable at home, knowing that things are relaxed.
Yeah, I've always heard it's a great sign when your kid just unleashes at home and they pour it out. And that's certainly the behavior of one of our kids, where he very lovingly, but definitely his self-restraint is different at home than in public, where we get compliments of how angelic he is. And we're like, if you knew the stuff he pulls at home, and they're like, I can't believe that. And it's not anything malicious. It's just he's got this feeling of freedom to just be whoever he wants to be. In public, he's able to pull back a little bit more and kind of be this little angel. So it's just funny to think how differently they all react in different environments.
Definitely.
So what are some common myths about attachment that parents often believe?
I think one thing is that the way attachment's kind of thought about in general public is that it really is this end all be all, like this is the thing you need to care about the most. This is the most important part of parenting. And that creates a lot of undue pressure and stress on parents who are already so stressed out. You are all doing your best, putting your best foot forward. And it's not necessarily the case that you need to actively be thinking about, okay, they cried, I have to respond right away or else they're going to have insecure attachment. Not how it works. It's these cumulative experiences. You're going to have bad days, you're going to have off days, but at the end of the day, you're doing your best and it's okay.
When I hear the word attachment, I hear little words in my head that circulate, like helicopter parenting. That's a big one, where I think just generationally that attachment has changed. Without going into too much detail, it was definitely, there's more open conversations now with kids than perhaps in the past. I think parents tend to be a little bit more hands-on, where you hear the jokes of those 80s and 90s kids who could just go play for 8 hours a day outside and the parents would like ring a bell and they'd come home. Now it's like, you can't leave the backyard unless I'm with you, or there's a lot more of that. So does this attachment parenting have a negative connotation to it, or is it time that society just kind of looks at it through a new lens?
I think what we're seeing with the idea of helicopter parenting is almost an overcorrection of this freedom that maybe the generations before had seen. But where attachment fits into this is that it's actually a big balance. So I've talked about maybe unresponsive parents, but parents who are also too responsive, too in the business, too helicoptery, are also maybe not going to be the most supportive parents. Because if you're thinking about, like, for example, you and your child are trying to build a Lego toy together. If you keep taking those toys out of your child's hands, they're not going to learn how to do it. And so it's really about engaging and finding that balance where, one, you want to keep your child safe and sound. I wouldn't send my child off. I don't have a child, but I wouldn't send my child off for 10 hours not having any idea where they are. That is terrifying to me.
Yeah.
But I also wouldn't keep them too close to the extent where I have to be watching them at every minute of every time of every second, depending on their age. I want to give them space to learn, to engage in things that make them happy, to let them find their own interests and, give them the support they need to become their own person. So attachment really is in the middle of those two.
That makes complete sense. And yeah, it's all about balance, but what isn't, right? Like it's finding that happy medium. Letting your kids go out of the house for 10 hours and not hearing from them, probably not the best. Not letting them have any breathing room, also not the best. So finding that middle ground makes sense. If a child didn't have ideal early experiences, and you touched on this, but let's just dive in a little bit more. Can they still develop that strong, healthy relationship later on with the people around them? Obviously, you said it can come from other sources, but what about with perhaps the same people that they didn't have those early experiences with that are still in their lives?
Definitely. There's always definitive room for for relational improvement. So we see this the case often with parents who are struggling maybe financially, or they're single parents, and what their main focus is getting food on the table, providing housing, and being able to actually see to the physical needs of their child. That is critically important, of course. Whether they are not able to be around very much because they are working these jobs might have implications on the relationship. But we do find that later in life, once this stressful time has passed, if parents and children are putting in the work to repair this relationship, it's like any relationship. People have to want it, they have to be able to acknowledge each other's feelings and provide sources of support. So it's always possible.
And there is no pressure like the pressure a parent feels, especially right now, and kind of navigating parenting through social media, through societal pressures, through, like you said, making ends meet and putting food on the table, through kind of a world post-pandemic of inflation. There's just so many things. I think we can all agree that parenting is just, it's hard. And unfortunately or fortunately, kids are witness to that. They're privy to it. They see us react to those pressures in life. And so I think it's good that they're able to experience the human emotion that comes as a parent, but obviously have to be careful not to project that onto the child and have them internalize it.
Yeah, with all things, it's definitely a balance. So you don't want your child also worrying about your bills and what they're struggling with and being too in tuned. But at the same time, it's also important that your children see you as humans, okay? For them to see you experiencing emotion without that becoming a burden on them. So again, it's all about balance.
Exactly. So we talked about this a little bit before, but what has changed across generations in terms of parenting styles? Like, what are the biggest differences that you've seen in your experience?
So I think historically and traditionally, we've seen that mothers specifically are the predominant caretaker, and historically fathers or the secondary caregiver are a little more hands off. We're not really seeing that anymore, which I think is great. Both parents are engaged. We're kind of leaving these historical gender roles behind, and we're able to really foster development within this family unit. And I think that that's great. Something else that I think is important is parents, I think historically and traditionally have always cared and always wanted the best for their children. But I think that we're also seeing more awareness of the importance of parenting and acknowledging that it's hard. It's a struggle, probably one of the hardest things a person can do, and fostering community support and trying to make it less competitive, although of course that still exists, but really just a more sense of community.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about the role of the father. I've definitely, I must be surrounded by great people in my life, but seeing the level of dad and parenthood of the men around me is just to a different degree. Of course, like obviously my own husband, I just can't even believe the kind of dad he is. He's very, very hands-on. He really, really, not just in a like, let's do things together, but like, let's feel things together kind of way, in a way that I wasn't necessarily brought up. And it's very admirable, but I see it with our friends and their kids too. And just them showing up at, the school and coming to the swimming lessons and sitting in on parent teacher interviews and just being more present. And I think that's going to have such a lasting generational impact for these kids.
Oh, definitely, for sure. Having, multiple people in your corner loving you and supporting you can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I remember when I had my first child, he was in the NICU for the first month of his life because he was a preemie. The support we had there was unimaginable. Like it was state of the art type of medical support. But then when I brought him home, I just like wanted him to myself a little bit because I had shared him, but didn't get to take him home and all that. But I never realized, because after that I had a term baby, and so he wasn't in the NICU at all. But that's when it really dawned on me how much it takes a village. It didn't dawn on me before that when I just had the one. And then we added our third kid and our fourth kid, and then that village got like more important. But yeah, there's like maybe a little sense of pride in there or something, but having that village, I mean, it's so important, not just for yourself to parent better, but for the child, and to say like, oh, well, grandma showed me this instead, or, my grandfather taught me how to bake this and that's not how you bake. And just having different perspectives and seeing the love from other people just makes them feel more safe.
Definitely. Yes. I think it's really important that children are exposed to a whole host of relationships, whether that be, a broader family, siblings, but also even with teachers and with other friends at school. I really think that the relationships we form really have the most meaning in our lives.
I agree with that completely. So, how might parents' own childhood attachment experiences show up in the way that they raise their own kids?
So, like you were saying, when you're actually being a parent, you're not really concretely thinking about these like processes. You're not in your mind calculating a formula that's like, oh, I responded in 10 seconds and they stopped crying in 30. That's not how it works. And that's never how it should work. But it's really that these ideas are kind of internalized and you're not really actively thinking about them. And we see that that's how children think about it too. So they're not actively thinking, oh, I was upset and my mom came and made me feel better. That's great. But the idea is that when I was upset, she was there. She came to help me. And it's kind of these expectations of what relationships should be. And we see that these expectations are kind of carried forward with us through all relationships that we have, including friendships in childhood, parenting, and romantic relationships, things like that. But then if you're just thinking about how you yourself parent, the way in which we expect things also is going to inform how we respond to things. So when I was upset, my mom was there for me. When my child is upset, I want to be there for them. Conversely, other things like, oh, my mom let me cry it out and I'm fine. Kind of these like expectations. And you're thinking to like, that's kind of the closest look we get at what parenting looks like. Obviously, there's no like hardcore manual of what parenting should be. And so it's very natural and very easy to tap into our own ideas of what our own childhood was like. And also, like, if you didn't have a great childhood, kind of knowing what you want to avoid and how you want to do things differently.
One of the books I read to my kids that I think is one of the best examples of generational attachment and love is Robert Munch, I'll Love You Forever. I am obsessed with that book. And I think everyone is. Like, it literally walks through, and it's not like it's in the most endearing way possible. It walks through the cycle of this mother's journey with her baby and loving him through the wild and like she says, I sometimes I feel like I'm living in a zoo and all that. And then it moves into him becoming the parent, and he takes the song that she sang to him and carries it through to his daughter. And like, for anyone who hasn't read that book, like, run and go get it. But isn't that such a representation of the attachment that starts so early, how it transitions through life? It shows him moving out and her still maintaining that connection with him, and then he transfers it to his own child.
Yeah, definitely. And we see that parents are important beyond childhood. Parents are still a source of support. Even when we're 40, even when we're 60, I don't think that there's ever a time when you really stop needing your parents if they have always been that source of support for you.
I agree. And it just changes. Like, my relationship with my parents is way healthier today than it was when I was 13 or 14 and I was, a grumpy teenager, but they're more like friends now. Still, like, I have that division of respect for them where I go to them for input and I want to make sure that they approve of kind of where I'm at. And so it's transformative, that relationship, but I totally agree. And I hope that that rings true, that right now I'm in the early trenches of parenthood where I have kids ranging from 18 months to 9, and they just love me so much right now. And I just hope that we're building that foundation that they can feel that even when they're 40.
That would be lovely.
I'll keep reading that book to them.
Yeah.
So what are some practical things parents can do every day to support a secure attachment with their kids? And can you give any kind of examples for that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just being kind to yourself. Parenting is hard just because it's a natural process that so many people engage with, and there's parents and children everywhere. It doesn't mean that it's easy. So giving yourself time to breathe, knowing that you are trying your best. But then also something that I like to tell parents is that your kids just want to hang out with you. They just want you to be around and engaged. And you see this even with children as young as 6 months old. They're holding up an object for you to look at. They want you to engage with them, want you to be interested in what they're interested in, and to provide that kind of context where you're not just there for them when they need to be fed or they need a diaper change, but also sharing and joy with them. So really trying to take time in your day to think about how you can engage in your own children's interests and make them feel, more loved and seen and heard.
That reminds me of, do you ever watch The Office?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, at least the first until Steve Carell left, one of the best shows ever.
Still pretty decent even after. Not as good, but didn't completely fall off.
It didn't fall off, and I will still watch it beginning to end. I still love it enough. But there was the episode where right before Jim and Pam got married, and they were holding up this camera that didn't exist, and they said, let's just really like take this in together. That's what that makes me think of what you just said, is let's just hold up that fake camera. I mean, we all have phones with us, but like really finding a way to absorb those little kids and feel what they're feeling and acknowledging what they're showing. Like you said, like they're holding up their teddy. They just want acknowledgement and acceptance, right? Because they're so fleeting and they're so fast, and just to be a part of it's such a privilege. But like you said, it is hard.
It's hard.
It's both things. It's amazing, but it's hard. It's amazingly hard.
Two things can be true.
Exactly, and this is an example of that. So before we wrap up, how can our listeners learn more about your work or find resources to help them understand that attachment better and kind of where they fit in?
So one resource I can think of top of my head is, if you're not familiar with the Conversation Canada, it's an online web source for articles that are written by people like me, academics, but who write the articles for anyone with no matter their background to be able to understand that kind of those constructs. And I have quite a few articles on there about attachment theory and about sibling relationships that have a whole host of resources for other things to point you in other directions. So that would be the one that I would point to most if you're interested in keeping in touch with me and my work.
That's awesome. And what a great resource.
It's a wonderful resource. It's an incredible resource.
I'll be honest, I have not heard of that. And so if I haven't heard about it, I'm sure a lot of people haven't. So thank you so much.
No, it's a great resource, and it covers topics from many different disciplines from all different areas, not just on development and parenting, but it's very helpful.
I just think from a parenting perspective, it's endless questions. Like as a mother of 4 kids, every one of my kids is uniquely different with different needs, different likes, different interests. And so if I read one article, it just will not encompass all 4. And so to have that ability to tap into different questions you might have for all the any of the children you might have, I think is awesome and something that parents can really benefit from.
Perfect. Well, I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Your wonderful podcast.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're definitely here to support parents and give them some answers that they have in the back of their heads that maybe they don't know who to ask. Perhaps this will open up some ideas for them and some information that they didn't have before, and that they can take it a step further after that and say, maybe I do need a little bit more help with this, or maybe I am on track, or maybe this is a validating feeling to go, I am doing a good job, and maybe it's not good to in this person's eyes, but I know I'm doing what's right for my own child.
Definitely.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me and for sharing this information. It's a tender topic. It's kind of like a warm hug type of topic but I think it's a topic that really does kind of wrap kind of like the virtual arms around everybody, to know that how important it is when that baby's first born. What you're doing with them is so meaningful, but every step of the way has meaning. And I think you brought light to that, and you gave practical examples where we can all fit in and we can all be like, yeah, that makes me think of this, or this, that reminds me of my childhood, or, so I love your work. I think it's important. I think it's good to dive into what parents are doing right and how they can improve on the things that maybe they don't know any better, and how we can support kids better.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say is, parents who are thinking about these things are already doing a wonderful job. The fact that they're even cognizant of wanting to support their children is already an amazing place to be.
Okay, did everyone hear that? Like, you're thinking about it, you're already doing something good. We put so much pressure to be doing the top end of things, but just even recognizing a symptom is where it starts. And I think that that's really what parents need to do, is they have to be honest with themselves and reward themselves and kind of like pat yourself on the back a little bit more and always do better. And that's where it starts, like you said. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to get this podcast out to parents.
Yeah, I'm excited for them to hear it.
That's a wrap on this episode of Parenting Adventures. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you're walking away with fresh insight and a little more confidence for your parenting journey ahead. And if you're looking for academic support, head to tutorteach.ca to learn how we're here for families just like yours. Until next time.